2025 is a big year for Anwar Ibrahim because it marks his second full year as Malaysia's Prime Minister. One of the biggest ways to establish what his plans for 2025 is through the Malaysian budget for 2025. So, let's discuss the budget and what it's going to accomplish for Malaysia. The 2025 National Budget of Malaysia was unveiled on October 18, 2024, with a total allocation of 421 billion Malaysian ringgit. Its theme was reinvigorating the economy, driving reforms, and prospering the rakyat, which focuses on balancing fiscal consolidation with economic expansion. Before we talk about its specific impact on businesses, households, and the nation's economic trajectory, let's first talk about the economic outlook for Malaysia. Malaysia's economic fundamentals remain strong, despite challenges posed by global uncertainties. In 2024, GDP growth was estimated at 5.1%, which is one of the highest in the entire Southeast Asian region. For 2025, the government projects GDP growth between 4.5% and 5.5%, which still puts Malaysia as one of the region's fastest growing economies. Let's table out the key economic indicators for Malaysia. Here you can see the economic outlook for 2025. Malaysia is expected to grow about the same as its growth for 2024. The difference, however, is inflation. The inflation rate is expected to be higher for 2025. This means average Malaysians should expect the price of goods and services to go up higher as compared to 2024. One of the reasons for this is because of Anwar's subsidy rationalisation. Anwar's government is going to reduce broad-based subsidies, particularly on fuel and electricity, which will increase costs for businesses and households. What this means is that they will reduce subsidies for petrol, diesel, electricity, and other essential goods. But they are not reducing it entirely. They are going to target specific groups, especially those classified as low-income households. Indeed, while this will drive the overall cost to the upper-class households, the low-income households will likely not be affected. The argument is simple here, and it's the fact that Malaysia gives too many subsidies to everyone. Here's a graph on the federal government budget of Malaysia for 2025. Here you can see that for the year 2025, they are expected to spend over 12.5% of the 421 billion ringgit into subsidies and social assistance alone. That is a big figure that the government aims to use and target those who really need it most. Now, back to the economic outlook. Malaysia is also expected to see a decrease in their public debt, which is a sign of good fiscal management. You can see that the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP is also going to go down. This shows that Anwar's government is going to be spending less than their revenues. Here's a graph comparing Malaysia's government revenues to their expenditure. Here, you can see that they are going to generate 421 billion ringgit, which is the money needed to fund the expenditure. But that money isn't actually generated through taxes alone. Some of it, as you can see in the graph, is generated through taxes. For instance, income tax, the largest contributor, would give 41.8%. Indirect taxes, such as SST, customs duties, and excise duties, at 16.7%. There's even non-tax revenues, which come from dividends, Patronus contributions, and other fees at 19.2%. But if you take a closer look, you get to see that there is also borrowings and government asset use, which contributes 19.2%. This category is directly linked to government borrowings. The government of Malaysia is still going to borrow money to fund their expenditure. The only good part of it is that it's not going to be that big as we saw earlier. The government is only expected to have a fiscal deficit to GDP of 3.8%, much lower than 2023 and 2024. Now, moving on, there's a lot of changes that will be done for Malaysia's taxation system for 2025. This is to enhance revenue collection while ensuring fairness. This will also ensure that Malaysia's federal government budget is funded properly without the need for excessive government borrowings. The new taxes range from a dividend tax on individual shareholders. There's also e-invoicing implementation, which aims to reduce tax evasion and increase compliance, and new tax incentives for AI, digitalization, and green investments. This dividend tax is particularly interesting because it aims to add a 2% tax on dividend income for individual shareholders whose annual dividend income exceeds 100,000 ringgit. This measure targets higher income individuals and aims to make the tax system more progressive. Put simply, the government strategy is not to impose blanket taxes on all citizens, but to target sectors where the ability to pay is higher, thereby preserving incentives for lower income groups while increasing overall revenue. There's also the expansion of the Sales and Services Tax, SST. They had expanded it to cover non-essential items. For example, premium imports such as avocados and salmon may face higher sales tax rates, while basic food items remain exempt. They have also added B2B commercial transactions. The scope of the service tax will extend to include commercial service transactions, such as fee-based financial services, ensuring that business-to-business activities contribute to tax revenues. Then finally, they are also enforcing a global minimum tax on multinational corporations starting 2025. Beyond taxes, there's also the subsidy rationalization. We've discussed this in length earlier, but it's important to actually talk about who gets them and who doesn't. As we mentioned earlier, there will be rationalization on the RM421 petrol subsidy. Currently, a significant portion of government spending is devoted to subsidizing fuel. The new policy will phase out blanket subsidies for RM95 petrol, instead offering targeted support that excludes foreigners and the super wealthy. This move is projected to save billions of ringgit annually, which will then be redirected towards other public welfare programs. For instance, here's a graph on the RM95 price. Data from the Department of Statistics and Ministry of Finance, Malaysia. Here you can see that the price of this type of fuel, RM95, is constant. For everyday Malaysians, this is normal. You don't see the price of fuel going up or down, it's just one price that is set by the government. From a foreign country's perspective, this is different. Countries like the United States sees their fuel price fluctuate every single day depending on the global oil prices. The reason for this constant price of Malaysia is because of the government's fuel subsidy program. This, however, as we mentioned just a moment ago, is costing the government billions of ringgit annually. Thus, there will be changes for this moving forward. Another important subsidy to talk about is that there will be adjustments for education and healthcare. The government plans to reduce subsidies for high-income groups while maintaining adequate support for the majority of Malaysians. For example, while subsidies for public boarding schools and hospitals will be streamlined, additional cash handouts and targeted social assistance programs will be enhanced for the lower-income groups. Now, let's talk about the overall expenditure of the budget. Let's pull up the graph earlier again in the federal government budget for 2025. Here we can see that the government is spending on various aspects, and we've already discussed in length about the subsidies and social assistance. Now let's talk about an important part of it, which is the development expenditure. This development expenditure is targeted towards investments in things like agriculture, the environment, for transportation, education, housing, and so on. Here's a table for that. Data from the Ministry of Finance Malaysia. Here you can see that for 2025, total expenditure for economic is expected to be 39.9 billion ringgit, and of which will be spent in various sectors. Likewise, for social, you can see spending for education, housing, and so on. The only thing to probably worry about is the fact that its share to GDP is going down, which means that the government is allocating a smaller proportion of the country's economic output to development projects compared to previous years. There's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the factors that we see is simply because Anwar is trying to reduce government spending to decrease the fiscal deficit and help ease the public debt of Malaysia. Finally, before we end the video, one last thing to mention is the social measures and workforce empowerment that Anwar is going to bring. For 2025, Anwar and his government's budget includes several measures aimed at directly improving the well-being of the Rakyat. One of the most immediately noticeable changes is the increase in the minimum wage, from 1,500 ringgit to 1,700 ringgit per month. This wage increase is designed to help lift living standards amid rising living costs and ensure that the benefits of economic growth are shared more equitably. Following the minimum wage increase, the budget will also include new tax reliefs on interest payments for first-time home buyers. For example, individuals purchasing homes below 500,000 ringgit can claim up to 7,000 ringgit per year, while those buying homes priced between 500,001 ringgit and 750,000 ringgit are eligible for 5,000 ringgit per year relief. Then there's also an increase in the tax relief limit for medical and insurance premiums, which will see an increase from 3,000 ringgit to 4,000 ringgit. This measure is intended to reduce the financial burden on families while ensuring access to quality healthcare and education. As you can see, Anwar's 2025 national budget is an ambitious one. It aims to change the entire subsidy program that Malaysia has had for a long time. It also aims to help those who are in need the most. The most important one for this budget, however, is the fact that it aims to reduce the debt of Malaysia, which is one of the biggest challenges that the country will face if left to grow. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.